This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
More rewards, more savings. With American Express Business Gold, earn up to $395 back in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select shipping, food delivery, and retail subscription merchants. Enjoy the benefits of membership with the Amex Business Gold Card. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have gone under the radar and passed most people by. I am your host, Derick McDuff, and joining me today, finally for the first time, is a good friend of mine, Alix Catherine. How's it going, Alex?
It's going. How's it going with you?
It is going very well. Alix is, of course, like I said, a personal friend of mine. We've been friends since college, and she is, of course, also the co-host of The Welcome Party. Before we get into talking about Spice World here, which is, of course, the movie you chose for us to talk about today, what did you want to let the people know about yourself and The Welcome Party?
The Welcome Party is your exclusive invitation to pop culture. So what we do is we actually try out different medias within the pop culture space, and then we share our experiences with our audiences. That way, if they're trying to get into something, they're not doing it by themselves. They're not running into that gatekeeping wall that so many of us have run into. We're more like gate crashing, and we try to make everything as available as possible for our fans so that they can get into anything they want without feeling any of that pressure or pushback.
Yeah, it's a really fun time. You know, you do it with obviously your husband and past and future guest JPG, who's been on here, and then of course Cole as well. So it's a lot of fun.
Thanks. Yeah, we're really excited. We're kind of taking it a new direction this year. We're going to YouTube instead of Twitch. So it's going to be a big of an adjustment for us right now. But I'm really excited to see where it goes. And it's going to be a little easier for us to record with, life and everything else. So I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And but yeah, that I guess that brings us to talking about, you guys always talk about pop culture stuff. This is a very pop culture heavy movie we're going to be talking about today, which is, of course, as I mentioned, Spice World, which is the 1997, I was going to say music biopic, but it's not really that. It's more like, as the Wikipedia describes, it's analogous to A Hard Day's Night from the Beatles. But of course, this is the Spice Girls. So it's a kind of fictionalized version of the life and times of the Spice Girls, released at the height of their mania, with a slew of British character actors in it, and of course the 5 Spice Girls as the main characters. Alex, when I came to you and said, hey, I would like you to be a guest, this is the movie that you pitched for me to talk about, and I only had vague recollections of it before I had rewatched it for this. Why did you choose Spice World for your underrated pick?
Oh, nostalgia. I mean, this movie, I remember seeing it in theaters, and I think it was one of the first big movies that I begged my parents to take me to. And then, I'll age myself a little because you already said 1997, so we all been new, right? But I bought the VHS tape for this. It came with the poster. I was so excited. And I didn't realize, when I was watching this back, how much of it I clearly remembered. But I must have watched it so many times because I was literally saying a lot of the lines with the film. And I cannot remember the last time I watched this. So I must have watched it a gazillion times as a kid.
Yeah. There's definitely movies like that where, like I was rewatching Beauty and the Beast for the first time in probably 15 years the other day, and I was like, I am amazed by how much of this I remember.
Yeah, those moments you're like, oh, my parents must have hated this because I know it far too well.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely, like I said, me also being a kid of the 90s, there's definitely those movies that stick with you. And it's always interesting rewatching them and seeing how they hold up. So, with that being said, how did this one hold up to and for an adult Alex?
Woof. There was some of it that I watched where I was like, "What? I don't understand what the reasoning was behind what they were trying to do." And there were other things where I'm like, "Wow, this was really smart humor or really grown up humor that just I completely missed as a kid, that as an
Mhm.
adult I'm like, "Oh, wow. I can't believe they did that or got away with that." So it was really interesting to watch, and I think it's definitely one of those, like, so bad it's good movies, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I get what you're saying, but for me, like watching it, and I get what you're saying because like looking at the score, for example, on Letterbox, it's a really interesting breakdown whenever you see that because you can see like how many people gave it like a 5 star and how many gave it a 4.5 and how many gave it a 3, and it's a really interesting breakdown because this movie has overall a 2.9, which is a below average score. 3 is average out of 5, but a majority of the ratings are 5. So that just shows you that like most people were like, it's not that great, but then there's some people who are like, no, this is kind of a secret masterpiece. And I probably lean more towards that second crowd where I'm like, yeah, I get that it's really dumb humor and it's really like, at times just kind of like things will happen. Like the aliens just show up and you're like, what did that have to
Yeah,
do with anything? Like, why was that there?
100% there was no reason for that moment.
Right. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, doesn't do anything to move the plot along or do anything with the characters, but then never really gets referenced in a meaningful way again. But I think to me, I was like, this was like this bizarre, like nonsensical brilliance. The best way I can describe this movie is that it feels like Monty Python for the girlies, where it's this absurd British humor that is just but it's like instead of being like yeah, like it's a bunch of like old British dudes, it's a bunch of like young British girls instead, and they're just kind of going along the English countryside, and like, oh, we've got to get to the concert venue, which is the theme of so many concert movies, and all these just ridiculous, bizarre, out of the ordinary things happen along the way, while Richard E. Grant, or whoever, is kind of like looking at the sidelines, like, what is happening now? And it just kept getting more and more absurd and over the top. And there was that scene that I remember where there's like it cuts to like the little model of the bus instead of the actual bus, and then I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
this movie knows what it is, right? Like because with me, for the so bad it's good movies, I love those movies, but I feel like they don't know what they are. For me, this movie understood exactly what it was and what it was trying to do.
That's one of those moments that I was talking about where, like, I didn't get it as much as a kid as I did as an
Mhm.
adult, because the line right before that moment where the fake bus goes over the thing, he's like, "Yeah," and then the bus jumps the gap, and he's like, "Oh, that's expensive," and then you see the little toy model, and he goes, "It doesn't have to be." That's genius. That is such a great moment that, like, as a kid, I was just like, "Okay, whatever." And as an adult, I'm like, "Oh my god, that's amazing." Like, who came up with that?
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I also think that really it's the best possible way you can handle a Spice Girls movie because you've got essentially mostly non-actors, and I know some of them would actually have go on to have acting careers, but not all of them. Especially not at this point, they were not primarily known as actors and hadn't really refined that craft yet. So when you've got a big group of non-actors and you need to have them carry a movie, not just show up in a movie, but like all 5 of them carry a film, I think the best choice is to just have it be kind of ridiculous because they don't necessarily have to be good to be good. They're just playing these overinflated versions of the Eagles that they're already putting on. They're already these like 5 humors, whatever, like the these big ridiculous archetypes of like, here's the sporty one, here's the baby one. They're already used to doing that on tour, so now they're just doing that at a bigger level. And I think they don't have to deliver some like heartbreaking scene or like have it really be a serious thing or even like, a more serious comedy because they're just doing ridiculous stuff. And when you're doing that, it's like, okay, these guys aren't actors, but they can pull this off.
Really, and I think at that point in their careers, that's really all their fans wanted from them. Like,
Hmm.
I remember very clearly, I didn't need them to be top actors in a movie, right? I
Hmm.
had an idea of who they were based on the stereotypes that have been created for them. And that's all I wanted. I just wanted more of them, especially being one of the kids where, like, my parents would not let me go to their concerts
Mhm.
because, of course, the songs were inappropriate, which I get now and I didn't get then. But I wanted to feel like I was seeing them. And so having them play themselves instead of having them play, well, I know that they're caricatures of themselves, but
Mhm.
that's what they put out for the public, right? So having them play that
Right.
caricature of themselves instead of acting in some other way, I think did service to their fans at that time.
Right. It's like the whole when Taylor Swift released her Eras tour in the theaters, because of, there's a lot of people who couldn't go to see a Taylor Swift concert, so she releases this thing in theaters, and now everybody can go see it. And it's not exactly the same because it's not a literal concert. But like you're saying, it's like, okay, the people who can't, especially since they're from England, a lot of us in America, would not have been necessarily able to go see the Spice Girls. It gave people a chance to go see the Spice Girls on the big screen and to see them play at the Royal Albert and actually have it filmed in the real Royal Albert Hall was pretty cool.
I did eventually see them
Oh, nice.
when they did their reunion tour. I want to say I was like 19 or 20, and my
Very
brother
cool.
surprised me with tickets in Vegas at the Luxor.
That is awesome. I love to go see a concert in Vegas. Vegas is always really fun to go see, some live music at. I'm a big Killers fan, and I got to go see the Killers in Vegas, and they're from Vegas, which is cool. But you being it sounds like you were a big fan of theirs as a kid. Is that accurate?
Yeah, when everybody was fighting over NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, I was like, "Who cares? Spice Girls."
Nice. So then who was and who is your favorite? And is it the same, I guess?
Okay, so who I really wanted to be was Baby Spice.
Mhm.
I tried to do, like, the pigtails, and I tried to have, like, a lollipop with me, but every time my friends and I would play Spice Girls, they always made me Sporty Spice because I was an athlete back then, and I was a dancer, and I was skating, and so, all my friends were like, "Well, you're the athlete, so you're sporty," and so I always had to play Sporty Spice, but I always really wanted to be Baby.
Okay, that's interesting because as a kid, Baby was definitely my favorite. I was like, okay, like like I'm like 7 or whatever when this movie comes out, and so I'm just like, Baby Spice, she's like the cool young one, whatever, like so I relate to her. But like then rewatching this as an adult, I was like, oh, Sporty is a badass. Like Sporty is like an icon. Like she's just like, and also like I appreciate that like Sporty is and like a lot of the stuff in this is kind of very queer coded. I was like, that's pretty cool. It feels like they slipped that in and just like at a 97 they were just like, yeah, well, we understand who some of our fan base is, so we're gonna put this in. We understand probably some of the girls who like Sporty Spice. I'm like, I appreciate that.
I think at some point it came out later that 2 of the Spice Girls were dating.
Okay, I did
But
I did not know that, but I mean that checks out, I guess.
I can't confirm that. Like, I know somebody's gonna Google that, and it's gonna be in the comments somewhere, and I have a computer in front of me, and I totally could, but I'm not going to. So but I will say,
That's
I
fair.
think, like, at some point, 2 of them were dating.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I'll have to try and dig into that, but yeah, this there's definitely like even if that didn't happen, the vibes are there, and I think that they're not shying away from it at all in this film.
I totally agree with you. They kind of the caricatures of the girls really could fit so many different people and facets, and I think that was something that was really special about the Spice Girls. Like, I don't know enough about Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, but I felt like to the most
Mhm.
part they all look the same, they all act the same, and there was something so special about where the Spice Girls were so different, each girl,
Mhm.
so you could fit into a personality type.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And because they feel like you said, like I said, each of them is like what other than like some of the Backstreet Boys. It's like, oh, here's the like bad boy, and here's like, but they're like literally like, no, these guys are kind of like branded and like meant to be like, here's like these 5 very, they're almost like the Ninja Turtles or something, where it's like, no, here's this one, they're like this one's the scary one, this one's the ginger one, here's Posh, and they really play into that over the course of this film, which I appreciated. I also like how British this movie is. Like, it's obviously they're driving around in the bus with the Union Jack. They've got all these great British actors. We mentioned Richard Grant. Alan Cumming, and you've got James Bond, and Roger Moore is the chief. That's the head of the record company. That's really clever. Bob Hoskins shows up in there. Like, a lot of people show up as themselves. We were talking about before we recorded, is like Hugh Laurie has a cameo in there as, like, I
Oh,
guess.
I found it, by the way.
Yes.
It's the scene where they're saying that Baby Spice could get away with anything, and
Mhm.
there's the detective guy who's trying to figure out who murdered somebody, and she's got, like, all the machine gun stuff, and then he blames the priest. That's Hugh Laurie.
Okay, very nice.
The one that surprised me was, well, Alan Cumming, obviously. I had
Mhm.
no idea that was him, and I love him from, I wanna say it's Romy and Michelle's high school reunion?
Oh, yeah.
That, like, I grew up on that movie, and so realizing that he was in both is totally wild. But I've been watching a lot of British, what are they called? Panel shows, I think they're called.
Okay.
And Jonathan Ross and Stephen Fry are on a lot of those panel shows. And obviously, growing up, I had never heard of either of them, but I've been watching them so much. And so when they popped up on my screen watching Spice World, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like big British names in here. And I didn't realize growing up that they threw so many big British actors in this.
Yeah, because I barely remembered this movie from when I was a kid. The one scene that stuck out to me was, I just remember the guy coming out of the toilet. Like, that was all, like, whenever
Oh,
anybody
that
would,
freaked me out.
that was like a core memory for me, was like creepy bald head like emerging from like the toilet or whatever, and just really plays into just how bizarrely funny this movie is, and why something like that would stick to me, that it's just using this ridiculous iconic imagery. But yeah, I didn't know who Richard E. Grant was when I was a kid, and now I'm like, oh yeah, he's like incredible character. Plays old Loki, shows up and like as an evil, guy, like a stormtrooper in Star Wars or whatever. Like, he's incredible. Saltburn, all these other great things. So yeah, it's a movie that I think, like you, I did not have appreciation for it as a kid, but watching it as adult, I'm like, man, this is really good. And it's a movie that I think really kind of got missed. I think people misinterpreted. I think people just watched it as like, this is a bad movie. This is a movie where they, it's really dumb, but it's not smart dumb. It's just dumb. And I think that, you miss this stuff, like, oh, here's, like we talked about with the bus joke. It's like, okay, here's like, it's the cheap thing. And then, and I think, with your husband, we talked about Josie, possibly doing Josie and the Pussycats, and how that's
Oh,
another
love
movie
that
with,
movie.
right? It's a good one. And with like an all-female cast, and gets kind of like dismissed as like, oh, this movie's dumb. It doesn't know what it's doing. But I'm like, no, it really does. And I wonder like why the reason for that is. I think part of it is like, you don't get the benefit of doubt because it's the Spice Girls. They're seen as these kind of just like, oh, these are just pop stars. And rather than Monty Python, which is a bunch of like, oh, these are all old renowned British comedians, all these old white dudes, it's like, instead it's like, oh no, these are like young people. They don't get the benefit of the doubt. And the movie kind of gets seen as just schlock when it's actually quite clever, I think. Wow, would you agree with any of that?
Totally. And I think that's what I didn't get as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, as a kid, I was just so excited by it all, and all the scenes were funny and relatable. But as an adult, there is just a cleverness to this.
Mm-hmm.
And although I do think, like the alien scene, there's some things that I don't think quite landed. And maybe that's a part of why it didn't hit for adults as much, right? Because it has a couple of moments you can't justify, right? And those little moments, I think, could be what kind of take it from full cult classic to just more of a like cult appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so smart. And even when you look at the cast and then the names, I mean, Elton John is in it.
Yeah.
Like, that's wild.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those movies that, as the years have gone by and another new generations that are more, I think Gen Z is very like self-referential and just kind of like, with its humor, just kind of like bizarre and like all that stuff. And I think as generations like that kind of go back and watch this movie, it's starting to get reappraised. And I think people are starting to like look at this and be like, oh no, like Spice Girl is something we missed on. And I think it also has a lot of interesting commentary on like gender norms and the way that like female, particularly like entertainers, but particularly female entertainers, are just kind of commodified. That is there and it's very subtle that I think got missed at the time that I think people are starting to pick up on now. And I think that's part of the reason is like, obviously we could watch this on VHS and stuff and like that, but now with DVD and everything, I think more people are starting to see it. And it's weird that it's not streaming, because I feel like it would get even more of a reappraisal if it was widely available streaming, but it's apparently
That
not.
was so odd. It was really hard to find. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even think I could rent. I was trying to rent it off of Amazon. Like, I really struggled to find a way to watch this film, and that was really surprising to me. And I assume it has something to do with the rights of their music.
Yeah, I think that's got to be it, because I had the same thing where it's like, okay, cool, let me watch this. Okay, it's not streaming anywhere. Let me rent it. I can't even do that. I think you actually have to get a physical DVD to do it, which is a bummer. But yeah, like I think probably the music rights to it are, the reason. A lot of these times these music movies run into that trouble. But on that same, in that same vein, this is a great music movie. Like there's a lot of really good, like the Spice Girls songs in this really hit, and they come at really like great times, and it gets the vibe going, I think.
Yeah, I think they used all the right songs in all the right places. And they even used little references to their own songs, like having one of their songs play when they were at the club. That's such a great
Mm.
way to not have to pay for somebody else's music still. And it makes you want to go dance to their song because they're dancing to their song. And then when the guys are trying to get into the party and it's, when three become one, it's the cute little references.
Yeah, there's a lot of like cheeky stuff like that. I really enjoyed all that stuff. It feels like a very musically literate film. Like I said, it's definitely riffing on like A Hard Day's Night and all these kind of like British movies in the 60s, which is like, oh, here's a gang of crazy, musicians, and here's the real story, but it's like, it's totally a fabrication. It's kind of zany and off the wall. So definitely appreciated all of that. But yeah, I guess just other than all kind of like the zaniness, all the ridiculous stuff of the movie, how did you feel about it overall?
It's still really cute. I think it's the best movie out there? No, of course not. But, when you're talking about watching a 90s film, I do
Hmm.
think it holds up in that same way that 90s films are made,
Hmm.
but it almost has the same genius as, oh my gosh, who's the one who makes songs about other people's songs?
Oh, Weird Al?
Weird Al, right? Like,
Yeah.
thank you. He did his documentary is very much obviously not his documentary, and it's all
Hmm.
these big name actors and big name singers, and he's telling this fake story of his life, and it's really very similar in that same vein that the Spice Girls did when you really think about it. Because that story isn't true, right? They all came together, I think it was a competition is how that group was
Right.
formed, but they were trying to sell that they were a friendship. And the story is silly and ridiculous and off the walls, and you have all these people come into it, and it's told in such a 90s way, like it's a capture of how we watched films then. But I think people blew it off, but if it had come out now, people would have been like, "Oh, it's just as good as or almost as good as Weird Al's," right? Because it's the
Right.
same concept.
Yeah, because when Weird came out, like whatever, like a year or two ago now, like it's obviously the fake story of Weird Al's whole life, and it's so ridiculous and over the top. And it once again, that's like another movie that has all these like really famous actors in it playing, themselves, or just like I think Conan O'Brien plays Andy Warhol in that movie, just like all this ridiculous over the top stuff. And so yeah, people are like, oh yeah, this is like very weird and funny and stuff like that. And yeah, I think that if this was a more modern movie and was, instead of just being a 90s movie, was like a 90s throwback or something, people would really dig it. But I think that it comes out, it gets taken too at face value, which is something that I think, a problem that a lot of movies that at the time ran into, even something like Speed Racer, which came out, 12 years later or whatever,
Yes.
gets terrible reviews, bad box office. People like in retrospect are like, no, this is kind of secretly just really genius. I think this does the same exact thing.
In that same way, like, I didn't get Speed Racer. I didn't
Mm.
get it when it first came out, that movie. I was like, this is really dumb. And then when you look back, it's that understanding of, oh, this movie didn't take itself seriously. And you have to understand that to understand that the movie's then good.
Yeah, exact. That is exactly right, I think. And it's something I think we've probably, with the internet and TikTok, who knows if that's going to still be around if it keeps going back and forth. But like even just YouTube, the way that we consume media and just like things being kind of ridiculous and tongue in cheek is so different than 1997 that I think we are trained to like pick up on this subtle stuff like that and to understand like, oh no, this is doing something else. It's got really good music and it's got this zany story and it knows it's never going to actually tell the real story of the Spice Girls coming together, so it might as well tell the most sensationalized possible version of that fake story.
And something you touched on too was that they kind of break a lot of those gender norms and that representation stuff. And when you think back to the 90s, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
That wasn't something, I mean, maybe I need to go back and watch more, but to me it was very much these are boys, these are girls, you have to be hot. If you're not hot, you're the nerd that gets bullied and then they have to turn you hot for some bet, right? Like
yeah. She has glasses and a ponytail. It's that whole thing.
100%. And when you look at these women, of course they're hot, right? Like they're
Mhm.
all hot in their own way. Their bodies are incredible. They can all sing, they can all dance, even though the dance instructor can't, which is a whole separate thing. But they're all very talented. But what I really liked about it was they show that there's so many different ways to be beautiful, right? They don't all
Mhm.
look the same. They didn't take a person of color and say, "Hey, we want you to look exactly like this white woman." Now, did they take her to an extreme that maybe we shouldn't be taking people of color to and, right, associate maybe the wrong
Mhm.
word to it? Sure. But they still kept her hair her hair. It wasn't like, "Oh, we're gonna straighten it out and make you look like these other women and make you fit in." Posh already had a reputation. They didn't force her to change that. They adapted to hers. And so I think they showed you can be athletic and be pretty. You can be yourself and you represent your culture and be pretty. You can be a girly girl and be pretty. There wasn't one type that they like squished everybody into. And that's a huge thing when you're talking about what we did see back then.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, yeah, they do really show all of these different sides of femininity and just how different women look. Like there's all these different sides and how you can be attractive being sporty or more traditionally sexy or just kind of like more of a girly girl or whatever. Like just be yourself. And you can be popular and successful and attractive and all these different things. This movie does such, I think, a good job of like showing that and showing how like also I think the Richard E. Grant character is like a good ally in this. He tries his best, I think, and then also like the constraints that other men are trying to put on them. So I think all that dynamic is really prominently on display in this film.
Is wild for the 90s. That's the context, like, I think people need to remember, right? There's so many things we watch that don't hold up.
Mm-hmm.
The context of the 90s and how hard some of these movies push through, like, you gotta give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a lot of stuff that you watch from this era that really does not hold up. And there's like Spice World isn't like perfect. There's some moments that don't exactly work, but there's even some stuff from 5 years ago that holds up much worse than this. So I think that it's really well done, really well handled. So I definitely got to give it its props for that. But yeah, and any other thoughts you wanted to add about Spice World here?
One thing I did really like, and I wish I had written down the quote exactly as she said it, but there's a moment, and it's so fleeting, where I wanna say it's Ginger Spice, and she just goes, "Girl power, equality for all genders," or both genders. And it was
Hmm.
this moment because, at one point in the film, she talks about how she's talking to a guy, and she's like, "We're not trying to be intimidating. We're not trying to be stronger than or better than men," or whatever it is she's saying. She's like, "We're just trying to be there, but men get intimidated by us." And I think even now, right, in 2025,
Mm.
there's so many times when a woman is strong and people will instantly try to cut her down because she's a woman. And they'll instantly
Yeah.
try to cut her down if you're talking about feminism. They're like, "Oh, well, you're trying to push men down or you're trying to push whatever down. And it's like, that's not what anybody's fighting for, right? We're fighting for
Mhm.
equality and equity. And that's what she was talking about all the way back then in 1997. And we're still talking about it today, and not just with women. Now we're talking about it with people who are non-binary, people who have, multiple genders, or, whoever you are, whatever you're fighting for. That fight's gone on for so long, and it's, more people are fighting for it now. But even back then, where girl power was in my head, oh, it's all about girls. And then it really isn't. It's about fighting for equality. And I loved that little line so much because it pushed for something that, again, in 2025, we're still fighting for.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely correct. And, I think Spice World was the Barbie of its day, honestly, in the same way that Barbie touches on all of those same themes about like equality and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, like girl world and girl power and stuff like that, but it's actually just about like equality and building a better world for everyone. So I think that you see a lot of that DNA in a lot of films that get released today. But yeah, I guess my last question for you before I get you out of here is so obviously this is like a musical themed movie with a real group. Do you have any other musicals or jukebox musicals that you wanted to shout out to anybody here?
Oh my gosh. I grew up on musicals, so that's a dangerous question. Gypsy with Bette Midler was
Hmm.
absolutely like one of my favorite movies growing up. I know it doesn't hold up well.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
So good, so good, so good.
Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack.
Because they have framed jeans.
Nike? Yes.
Just so many good brands.
Vince, Kurt Geiger London, Rag & Bone, and more are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. You never know what you'll find, but you know it's going to be so good. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
I
mean,
actually haven't seen it, so
It's really good. It's based on a true story. Both the original and the Bette Midler one are really good. It's just that I grew up on the Bette Midler one more,
mm,
but they're both good. The Bette Midler one has Monk in it, which is like
okay.
surprising. And I didn't, you don't realize it till you go back and watch it, but totally surprised me with that one. Another really good one is The Producers.
Nice.
I'm trying to think what other movie musicals. There's so many that are there, but not always the best done.
Well, let me ask you then. Do you have any
Mhm.
favorite, jukebox musicals? And I know this isn't that exactly, but any musicals where it's just like using music that is already like popular in
So
the
less
real
Bye
world?
Bye Birdie, less Fiddler on the Roof, less Music Man, more like Spice Girl kind of Mamma Mia
Yeah,
vibe.
yeah, Mamma Mia. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, something where it's like, okay, this is popular music that and here we're recontextualizing it for the movie.
Mm,
Because the one I will give is
yeah.
Moulin Rouge is one of my favorites, where they're like
I
taking
hate
all these
Moulin
songs
Rouge.
that you hate it. I know it's a very divisive movie, but I kind of love that movie.
I just couldn't get through it, and I don't know what my problem was, and I should probably go back now and try again. But I swear to you, I fell asleep to that movie so many times I gave up.
That's fair. Distinctly remember like seeing Ewan McGregor walking through the rain and just being like, "Damn, I'm not attracted to men, but okay, I get it."
You know who I think does it really well is actually like Trolls.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
I don't know if Dreamgirls counts.
I think it would. Right. I haven't seen that movie. I don't think all the way
Dreamgirls
through, but
was perfection. It was
okay.
so good. The music was used so well. Jersey Boys is another one, but that was that was their own music, but it was their own story. So I'd say Jersey
Yeah.
Boys is a really good one. I think the way they did the movie with the music and how they did it on stage, if you ever get to see the stage version, so well done. And then I would say Dreamgirls. I haven't seen a stage version. I've only seen the movie, but so well done. And then for like a fun, silly one, Trolls for sure. I think the way they incorporate that in is really well.
Okay, nice. I'll throw in one more, and this isn't a feature-length movie. It's only like 30 minutes long. But in 2011, the Beastie Boys released. It's technically like a follow-up to "Fight for Your Right to Party," the music video, but it's like basically what happens after it, and it has like all of their music in it. But it's just like the Beastie Boys walking out of that party the next day. And the Beastie Boys are played by Elijah Wood, Seth Rogen, and Danny McBride. And they're just kind of like making their way through New York City, just being absolute terrors. And then there's time travel involved, and they meet the versions of themselves from the future. And it's Jack Black, Will Ferrell, and John C. Reilly. And it's just absolutely insane. It is. If you're a fan of the Beastie Boys, there's so many references. Once again, just a ton of famous people in it. I highly recommend anyone, even if you're a fan of the Beastie Boys at all, it's hilarious. It's it's just very smart, and it's great to see Elijah Wood be one of the ad rock or whatever. So I love that one.
That's amazing. I've never heard of that, but I will check it out because that sounds fun.
I'll post it a link to it in the description. But yeah, Alix, thank you again for coming on. This has been a blast. So glad I got you on here. What did you want to let the people know? How do they find the Welcome Party and yourself?
Yeah, so for myself, you can find me at Alixy Galaxy. It's ALIXY GALIXY. And then for the Welcome Party, it's at Welcome Party Pod on Instagram. And we're just going to be launching on YouTube this year. So we literally, I don't know when this is going to come out, so we may already be on YouTube by the time you hear this. But we are going to be launching on YouTube. So that's our big project right now. But you can absolutely hit me up. Instagram is my big one that's easiest to get in contact with me. I'm trying to be better about Blue Sky. I've posted a whole once, so you can see how that's going. But yeah, definitely check us out. And then if you guys are ever at any of the local conventions for California, WonderCon or San Diego Comic-Con, I'm usually there doing panels as well as you. So
yeah,
for you.
Yeah, it was great. You were the moderator for my panel at Comic-Con, which was a blast.
Yeah, that was so fun. It was your first panel, not your last panel.
No, yes,
so
definitely not.
So much more to come.
Yes, looking forward to many more. And but yeah, thank you everyone out there for listening. If you want to follow, if you're a fan of Alix's and you just came over here, I would love for you to give us a follow. On whatever podcasting app or platform you're listening on. If you want to give us 5 stars, that really helps the show get noticed quite a bit. You can go to underratedmoviepodcast.com to find the links to all of that and to all of the socials and everything else, including the Patreon. We have options for $1, $3, and $5 a month for Patreon, where you can get episodes early and ad-free. There's also a whole bonus podcast that I'm doing about films that were released in 2D or in 3D and reviewing them in 2D and seeing how they hold up, called Across the Second Dimension. Just got the first few episodes of that out. That comes out the 15th of every month. And then at $5, you can even make recommendations for shows for us to cover on the podcast here once you've been paying at that level for a certain amount of time. But if not, like I said, just give us a rating. That's a free way to help the show. That really, really does make the world of difference to us.
5 stars, and then put in the comments, bring Alix back, have her on more episodes than JPG, just so she can rub it in his face.
Yeah, I think he's been on 3 so far, so you gotta catch up. So yeah,
catching up to do. I can't help it. He's talented, and so I'll work on it though.
So are you. You guys are the real power couple. So But yeah, hey, you're edging away at his lead, so you're chipping away at it. So.
Well, thank you for having me on. This was way fun.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thank you everyone for listening, and I'll catch you all next time.